Yes, here we go.
There, okay, there's our lady telling us recording in progress. There we go. Okay, all right. Okay, thanks, Dawn. So I'm going to start the program here, and I want to welcome our small group of people, but nonetheless very interested in local history tonight. And the talk I'm going to be giving is titled "The Other McCormick of DuPage County," a Democratic patrician, Chauncey McCormick, who lived from 1884 to 1954. This is a headshot of him up there. I originally wrote this up as a paper for the 7th Annual Conference on Illinois History that was actually held in October 2005. I'm looking at those dates here in Springfield. And so I delivered this to a crowd of a few people, academicians and some school teachers and advocates, are people that enjoy local history and Illinois state history. And I would encourage everybody, if they're able to ever to attend that conference. This year, I think it's going to be virtual. That will be another plug for the Conference on Illinois History, which is done by, I believe, the Illinois State Historical Society down in Springfield on there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the next slide here. Let's see if I can progress here. There. Because I wanted to show everybody, and Dawn was nice enough to send everybody, I think it was this, I don't know if I'm holding that up enough, but this family chart, which really covered a lot of the Medills, the McCormick, and Pattersons. So if you've seen that, Chauncey McCormick is down here. I'm using my little arrow here. This is where Chauncey's at on this family chart. So William Saunderson, who was son of Robert Hall McCormick and was a brother to Cyrus McCormick, inventor of the Reaper. William Saunderson had two sons, Robert Saunderson McCormick, and his son was Robert Rutherford McCormick, or the Colonel. And then William Grigsby was Robert Saunderson's brother. And then he had not only just Chauncey, but a few other children, but Chauncey was one of his sons. And then Chauncey is the father of Brooks McCormick. And Chauncey and Brooks are the two connected to St. James Farm. Chauncey was the original owner starting in the 1920s, and Brooks McCormick took over operations of that farm in the mid-1950s. So I think it was nice, kind of plug this in here, it kind of keys in nicely. You can drop down that into this one other chart that Dawn had supplied on there too. So on that. So I'm going to get started here. Chauncey McCormick was really a passionate, idealistic individual, according to his closest political colleague, who happened to be President Herbert Hoover. He said that Chauncey McCormick possessed, quote, a certain missionary fire when it came to his thoughts and ideas on the politics of his life and times. And McCormick's interests were varied. Within the span of his lifetime, between 1884 and 1954, he was a spirited spokesperson on Republican politics, a fervent anti-New Dealer, a compassionate humanitarian, a friend of Poland during 2 world wars, an expert on the breeding of the Guernsey dairy cow, a possessor and connoisseur of art, and a commentator on American culture. He possessed a flair for writing and speaking, not only in English, but in the French language as well. This paper is going to focus, and my talk tonight is going to focus on McCormick's humanitarian work and relationship with Herbert Hoover, his activities with the Art Institute of Chicago, and a brief examination of his interests and hobbies as owners of the St. James Farm in Warrenville, Illinois, which is now part of the St. James Farm Forest Preserve, part of the DuPage County Forest Preserve District. And in examining these 3 areas, I really hope to bring to life what I think is a forgotten individual in Chicago and in DuPage County history. But before examining these 3 areas, it is going to be helpful just to provide a brief biographical overview of his life. So Chauncey Brooks McCormick, who's shown here on this slide I'm showing you on your right, if you're looking at the screen, was born in Chicago on the 7th of December, 1884, to William Grigsby McCormick. His father there is to his left. And I think this picture was taken at the end of William Grigsby's life. He died, I believe, in 1941 in December, just before Pearl Harbor was attacked. And interestingly enough, he did die at the Hawthorne Farm, which is actually a house that's still on St. James Farm, just south of Winfield Road. If you go past it really quick, near the farm fields, there's two foxes outside. So that was where William Grigsby hung out, so to speak, on some of the times when he was visiting his son and his grandkids on St. James Farm on there. So Chauncey's mother was Eleanor Brooks McCormick, and the McCormicks were of Scotch Presbyterian stock from Walnut Grove in Rockbridge County, Virginia, which is where a lot of the McCormicks originally settled in and came from. The most well-known McCormick, the inventor of the Reaper, Cyrus Hall McCormick, was William's uncle. And Colonel Robert R. McCormick, the famed editor of the Tribune, and William were first cousins. On his mother's side, Eleanor's grandfather and Chauncey's namesake, Chauncey Brooks, owned the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad and was a former governor. I found this out of the state of Maryland, of all things. Her father, Walter Booth Brooks, owned the Canton Company and several Baltimore banks. So this is a very, well-heeled, well-connected, and wealthy family that Chauncey is coming from on both sides of the fence on there. Chauncey was schooled at the University of Chicago until the age of 11. So I think it was the university school there for elementary school age children. And his parents enrolled him in the Groton Preparatory School from 1897 to 1903 in Groton, Massachusetts. And now Groton was under the leadership of a famous headmaster, the Reverend Endicott Peabody. Through the tutelage of Reverend Peabody, the young McCormick was instilled with the Groton spirit of what they called noblesse oblige, or we owe the general public to help people out. And being of service to people in the country was a high calling and encourage of all of its graduates. And it's also interesting to note that Groton in Massachusetts was the same school that would also count among its graduates Franklin D. Roosevelt and Chauncey's cousin, Robert R. McCormick. Chauncey attended Yale University between 1903 and 1907. And it was while at Yale University that he began to develop an intellectual and humanitarian interest and attitudes that I found out after researching his life would really remain with him throughout his life. This included an ability to speak and write perfect English. And one interesting anecdote is they had Sarah Bernhardt, the famed and esteemed actress, visited Yale University, and she commented to Chauncey, your mother brought you up well, hearing his French and how well he was able to pronounce French words and language. The Yale Alumni Yearbook showed that he was also active in the French and drama clubs. He was a contributor to the Yale newspaper, the Yale Current, and a member of Alpha Delta Phi fraternity. While at Yale, McCormick also began to develop a very deep sympathy for the poor and downtrodden of society. Chauncey could be considered a progressive in terms of his political and social beliefs and thoughts at the time. McCormick, during summer breaks, worked, as a matter of fact, as a day laborer at the McCormick International Harvester Reaper Works Company, which was then located in Blue Island, Illinois, just south of Chicago. He volunteered at the bathhouses that were in Chicago and lived for a while during 2 summers and helped out at Jane Addams' Hull House, which I thought was interesting during the summer, particularly in 1906, when he was between his junior and senior year. Chauncey's lifelong support for charity and volunteerism have their roots during this work. The newspaper of the Times carried the following front page headlines, such as this one that read on that. There was another one too. Let's see if I've got that. Wait, it's on that one. Scion of the Wealthy housed a laborer. Chauncey B. McCormick, heir to millions, works in the grime of his father's factory. And according to one of these accounts, it reports that Chauncey McCormick had just finished his junior year at Yale, and he says he wanted to see how the other half lives. He wanted to better the condition of the working man, and he wants his facts at first hand, while forsaking the C for the workshop, because a lot of his other young men that were in his class often would go off, to Newport Long Island on the East Coast to resort towns during their summer breaks and vacations. So he studied the living conditions of the working poor, this article continues, of Chicago. He lives and works with Jane Addams at the Hull House Settlement House. He spent his evenings in social research and study and not recreation, according to this one article that I read. This was really an eye-opening experience for a wealthy, quote, Baltimore lad, it was, as it was said in the newspaper. Chauncey was described by the press as, quote, a quiet, earnest boy, 21 years of age, whose brown eyes lose their somber sadness only when he discusses his work and ambitions. He is tall and slender and does not appear suited to the rough work he has undertaken at this factory with International Harvester. His Yale education and experience at Hull House were the beginning of his interest in social work that would stay with him in Europe following World War I with Herbert Hoover, and much later with the Illinois Children's Home and Aid Society and his work with Helen Keller and her Foundation for the Blind. Chauncey's wife was the debutante shown here in this picture. Later in years here, probably mid-50s, Life magazine photo, was the debutante Marion Deering. Later in her life, the editors of Life magazine declared Mrs. McCormick to be, quote, the successor to Bertha Palmer in Chicago social circles. Mrs. McCormick was one of the heirs to the Deering side of the 1902 merger between the McCormick Reaper Manufacturing Company and the Deering Reaper Works of Chicago to form the International Harvester Corporation. The newspaper accounts show that Chauncey pursued his debutante with a romantic fervor, and despite Marion's father disapproval of the romance. Marion Deering and Chauncey Brooks were married in Paris, France on the 6th of July, 1914. So here's, I believe, his father-in-law that's shown in here. I'm going to now turn a little bit of focus to McCormick's life from World War I until his death in 1954. Now, there was one person closest to him, his cousin, Colonel Robert R. McCormick. We're going to look at his relationship with McCormick, along with McCormick's purchase of St. James Farm in Warrenville. Politically and artistically, two people were closest to him. That was, first was Daniel Cotton Rich, who was actually director of the Art Institute from 1938 to 58, and President Herbert Hoover. Hoover became a close political ally beginning in the First World War era until McCormick's death in 1954. Prior to delving into a little bit of the Art Institute, St. James Farm, the relationship with the Colonel, we're going to focus on World War I and post-World War I experiences of Chauncey McCormick. Chauncey spent 2 years in France. So here's some more articles about the McCormick Deering and his father-in-law shown in this picture. That's Charles Deering that's shown in that picture. And there's another article describing their young life in Paris, France, and getting married on that. So married there in France, civil ceremony, and then a religious ceremony at the Episcopal Church in Paris at that time. So on that. And here's another society shot. I think that's probably from one of the Tribune or one of the other Chicago newspapers at the time, showing her all dolled up here in the 1920s era gear here as they're living in Paris and things on that. So Chauncey spent 2 years in France prior to the US entering into the war in April of 1917 with the American Expeditionary Forces. And he was a liaison officer assigned to the American 26th Division with the French 11 Corps. And he was later decorated with the Croix de Guerre from the French government for his service with this French Army Corps, because his French was fluent. And this was before America entered the war, by the way. So he was helping out the French with the American Expeditionary Forces. In 1918, he served under General Charles Dawes and was chief of one of the Army's purchasing departments. For his work, he received a citation from General Pershing and honors for his service there. Now, the most enduring relationship that McCormick developed just after the war was with a young mining engineer by the name of Herbert Hoover, shown here on the right. McCormick's relationship with Hoover began on a professional and humanitarian level And this would develop later into a very personal relationship that lasted, and they kept in communications with one another up until Chauncey's death in 1954. As a matter of fact, some of my research took me to the Herbert Hoover Library in West Branch, Iowa, where there are boxes of telegrams and letters between the two of these individuals. It's kind of fascinating following them from pretty much World War I all the way up to the time of the death, and a few correspondence with Hoover and Hoover's wife to Mrs. Marion Deering after he passed away. So it's kind of fascinating when you dig into some of these things, how far relationships go between some of the people involved in politics and humanitarian work as well. Hoover was appointed at the time by President Woodrow Wilson to lead the economic restoration of Europe, and they made him head of the American Relief Administration following the war. Hoover's administrative skills and methods of breaking through the bureaucracy and red tape became legendary during this period. And Hoover's work during the war would really catapult him to the presidency in 1928. We all know the afterlife of Herbert Hoover come 1929 and his defeat in the election, I believe, of 1932 to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Very tragic, but when you read a little bit more about Hoover's life, you find that he did great contributions to society in the area of engineering specifically, and also to humanitarian work as well. So it's kind of interesting, his life even before his defeat to Franklin D. Roosevelt. Hoover, along with the entire entourage of like-minded people, such as Chauncey McCormick, assisted in the distribution of over 20 million tons of food to 300 million people. They ran a fleet of ships. They directed the railroads and coal mines of Central Europe and restored crippled communications. This all happened after World War I. McCormick was officially appointed by Hoover to the United States Food Administration mission to Poland on the 22nd of December, 1918. This is a appointment certificate from the American Embassy in Paris, assigning Lieutenant Chauncey McCormick, part of the Quartermaster Corps, to work with Herbert Hoover just following the war after World War I. This is in another archive I delved into out at Stanford University. The Herbert Hoover Institute on War and Peace is out there. So there's a whole archive of Chauncey's papers as well that were divided after his death that went there. Part of it also went to the West Branch, Iowa papers at the Hoover Library. In January 1919, Lieutenant McCormick was to organize food relief efforts to feed millions of starving men, women, and children in the war-besieged area, specifically in the country of what was then being composed or recomposed of called Poland. Mr. McCormick received the most praise and the citation of the White Eagle of Lemberg for his work in bringing food supplies to the then Bolshevik besieged city of Lemberg, Poland. So you have to remember, if you recall, towards the end of World War I, you had a lot of the communists taking over and Lenin taking over Russia. So you had a lot of the Bolsheviks trying to seize and move in on Eastern Europe here at the time with the change of governments and leadership in Russia. He would later also receive the Order of Polona Restituta, I believe I'm pronouncing that right, from his friend Ignacy Paderewski, who became president of Poland. And Paderewski, I believe, was also a very well-known pianist and concert pianist. So he was elected to serve as president of Poland. Now, in a letter to his aunt, Anita McCormick Blaine, dated 17th of October, 1918, we kind of gain a sense of what Chauncey witnessed during the war and during this period. He says, quote, to his aunt Anita, "Here we seem to be surrounded by death and suffering. Every day I see and live with people who are bearing the most terrible and heartbreaking losses." In another letter he writes in 1919, quote, "I am busy and we work at a fever heat, always realizing how much we have to accomplish before we can be really effective against the Borsches, or the Germans. They seem to be worse monsters and hellishly wicked now that I have seen their handiwork than ever before, and I never lacked a hatred of their deeds. The world can never forget what they have done to children and women. I have seen things I could never believe if anyone even told me, he writes. And then he continues, he said, I should always have thought that somehow there must be a mistake. So again, we get the sense that this deeply affected this young man, his work he did with Poland. And I think some of this work really followed him through the rest of his life, through some of his philanthropic efforts post-World War I. Now, following his mission from Poland, if this wasn't enough, he was actually assigned to the economic branch of the then what was being held the Paris Peace Conference to Romania and Serbia to assist relief efforts in those parts of Europe post-World War I. He was then honorably discharged from the army in France in April 1919 with the rank of captain. So this is a picture you're looking at of some of the other men he was with who were composed of this mission to Poland. And there's an entire book, I believe one of these gentlemen, I cannot remember who is Mr. Leslie Grove, who was head of, with Chauncey, of this mission to Poland. And there's a whole book Groves wrote on the entire mission to Poland, which is kind of fascinating to read. And Chauncey contributed some of his diary entries to that book. So it's something, if you got some free time, you want to learn more about that, it's really an interesting, fascinating book on that. So Chauncey left France, where he and his wife had been living for a short period of time after the war, and returned to the United States in 1920. He turned his attention at the time to his family, as well as his business and philanthropic endeavors. Now, by this time, if you can imagine this, his family now included his three sons, Charles Deering McCormick, Brooks Chauncey McCormick, who would later own St. James Farm after the mid-1950s following Chauncey's death, and Roger Simon McCormick. The McCormicks purchased Marion and Chauncey there. They're shown in this daily news clipping photograph from the Chicago Daily News Archive that's online at the Library of Congress. They purchased a 600-acre estate farm in 1925 from a former plumbing supply manufacturer from Chicago named Lewis Wolf. The estate that they named St. James Farm would play a very important and central role to the upbringing of their family, and particularly to their three sons. And it had a big positive effect, particularly on Brooks McCormick being raised out in the country away from the city. Now, when not at his Lakeview Avenue apartment in Chicago, or at his winter home in Coconut Grove, Florida, or if that's not enough, you got to have a third home here, folks, to go to to get away from the summer heat in Chicago. He had a summer cottage, a huge summer cottage called East Point that was located in Seal Harbor, Maine. It was here during the weekends throughout the year that Chauncey was able to pursue on St. James Farm his hobbies of the hunt, horsing, and dairy farming, and enjoy really fresh country air away from the city of Chicago. He was a member of the historic Chicago Golf Club, which was right near his farm there in Warrenville, St. James Farm. Also, the other thing is Colonel McCormick was a member of the Chicago Golf Club. And then Marion's uncle was also a member, James Deering, was also a member of the Chicago Golf Club. And James was the gentleman that Marion and Chauncey lived with for a while, and they had their honeymoon at his house there on Rue Saint-Jacques or St. James Street in Paris. So you kind of get an idea where the name for this comes from, along with the namesake of James Deering, who was an industrialist and a businessman with International Harvester Company as well. So James Deering also maintained a house that's still there. He doesn't own it anymore, he's passed away, but that was directly off some of the fairways of the Chicago Golf Club. Adjoining St. James Farm to the north, of course, with the Cantini, which was the estate of Chauncey's cousin, Colonel Robert R. McCormick. See if I can advance this. There we go. This is sort of an early map view of the former Jude Gary farm in 1874 Atlas. So it was pretty much about 200 to 300 acres of what Jude Gary originally had owned back in 1830s, 1840s with his brother Erastus. This was the chunk of land that eventually, I think Brooks McCormick and Chauncey recomposed the entire estate of 640 acres eventually of what is now St. James Farm property. So the Colonel really had been instrumental in persuading this young couple to purchase St. James Farm. It was with the Colonel that Chauncey was really the closest. The two McCormicks had both graduated from the same schools after all, Groton and Yale. They both traveled in the same social circles near their estate, DuPage County. They jointly formed in early 1921-22 the Wayne DuPage Hunt Club in the 1920s. This is now known, I believe it was merged later with the Wayne Hunt Club, and the DuPage were merged to form the Wayne DuPage Hunt Club, which I think is still in existence to this day. They held similar interests when it came to politics, horses, the game of polo, and what we're going to call gentleman farming. Both were the last of the line, and this is kind of important and neat to know. These two gentlemen were really the last of the lines of these blue bloods of the Gilded Age McCormick family in terms of their background, their upbringing, how they managed their money and their business affairs and things. So a lot of that. They had both been personally tested and matured during World War I. You know, the Colonel was involved as an officer with the 1st Division, and Chauncey with his involvement as being a lieutenant and later a captain. So as we shall soon see, they both worked together in using the public relations instruments of their time to speak out fervently against Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal policies of economic reform. So this is another shot. It's kind of blurry. I apologize for that. I got to redo some of these slides, but this is a postcard that Chauncey would give to visitors. Come out to my farm. I want you to come out and check it out. So this is probably about, I want to say, taking a look at some of the roads on here, probably mid-1940s, early 1950s. So it kind of explains, you see Roosevelt Road there. So it's kind of a unique piece of history that's on there. They show Arrowhead Golf Courses on here. I think you see the stops of the Chicago Roar and Elgin roaring through Wheaton out of here, and the Wheaton Cemetery and the Wheaton Golf Club. So you could see, and then the Colonel's farm, of course, was located over here, just north of St. James Farm. So this is something my grandfather had amongst his belongings when he passed away. He was farm manager for Chauncey and Brooks, later Brooks, on St. James Farm on there. So this is a shot of Colonel Robert R. McCormick's house. And the thing you're going to notice that's missing is you're saying, okay, this is a shot of the west side of the house. So this is before the Colonel added, I believe I found out today that he added wings to this original mansion that was Joseph Medill's in, I believe, 1935-36. He added that huge library wing, which would go on this side of the house, and another wing on that side. So kind of an early shot of what was called Red Oaks Farm, later Cantini there. Now that's going under some restoration work at St. James at Cantini on there. So here's a great shot of the Colonel in his riding gear, probably has a crop somewhere under his arm with very heavy curtains hanging out behind him on there. So kind of an interesting shot on that. So St. James Farm became a great sense of pride for Chauncey's wife, Marion. She raised foxhounds and was responsible, not just Chauncey, but she was really responsible for the raising of the Guernsey dairy cows and bringing the cows onto the farm at St. James Farm. Now, this is a picture, a painting that was done by Amy McCormick. Amy McCormick was the Colonel's first wife. They were married in 1915, I believe, in Europe, just before World War II. So this painting is actually not Amy, but this is Marion Deering McCormick with some of the hounds painted by Amy McCormick. And this hangs, I believe, was able to get a shot at this when I was given a private tour of the mansion on Cantini. Asked if I could take a picture using my slide presentation. So this is a watercolor of Marion Deering on her horse, riding side saddle with her hounds, ready to go off to the hunt on there. Something like a Downton Abbey shot. So I kind of enjoy that one on there. So at St. James Farm, Chauncey and Marion set out to create what at the time was a model Guernsey dairy breeding farm, complete with the most modern, efficient, and experimental barns. The barns were immaculately maintained, cleaned, and conducive to the breeding of this top producing dairy herd. Many regional and national field days were held at St. James Farm, sponsored by the Illinois Guernsey Breeders Association and the American Guernsey Breeders Association. They also pulled in the University of Illinois Agricultural School. And this is a shot my grandfather took because he helped out at a lot of these field days, probably mid-1930s. And you see some of these young men in these coats. They're actually were some of the students or helpers from the University of Illinois at Chicago, or of Illinois Agricultural School. And I believe here's Marion. And I believe one of these people in here might be Amy McCormick that's sitting in. And here's, they've got one of the prize, some of the prize winning cows they're showing off. And you get a grouping of area farmers that attended from all over the Midwest to these field days. They held 4 or 5 of these on the farm. Now, one such field day really earned national attention by being profiled in the then fashionable upper crust and popular periodical Country Life in 1935. So if you ever get a chance, look up that article. Really fascinating, a period piece of the farm. The farm became really a serious hobby. It would also become known for its riding and horse stables when his son Brooks took over the farm in the late 1950s. So let me pull back a little bit to another slide. Now, this is a picture from Life magazine. This is a picture of Chauncey McCormick is on the far, whoops, oh, okay. On the far right here is Chauncey, and here's Marion, his wife. And this was taken at Chauncey's Lakeview apartment, which is an entire floor with servants' quarters off of Lakeview on an apartment building that still exists today. I don't know if they've broken it up a little bit, but Chauncey is here. Colonel had his second marriage and wedding conducted at the Colonel's apartment. This is his second wife. I believe her name was Marilyn Matheson Hooper McCormick. So she had been married before, but this is the Colonel's second wife. Amy, his first wife, had died. She had cancer previously. So this was a picture. And I believe this other gentleman here is Captain James Patterson, publisher of the New York, Daily News. So the Pattersons were a big newspaper editors and publishers. Another shot my grandfather took of St. James Farm. And people that have been on the farm here, I'm just sharing some of these family shots. So this is looking straight down at what is still there, the dairy farm. So some things have changed, some things have remained the same at St. James Farm. But there's the dairy barn where a lot of the action took place in terms of milking of the cows. And you can see way back here, just before they built another bull barn, is the milk house where they took the milk in over there. So, and I think over on the right is your red brick stable if you ever visit St. James Farm on there. So some interior shots of the cows going at it, probably eating their dinner, get ready to get milk the next day, following morning in there. So we've got some great inside shots of the barn. I think it's taken from the Country Life magazine article that I was sharing with you there too. And they also won a lot of awards, a lot of newspaper headlines. Tribune and I think the Elgin Courier too carried some of this reports on the Guernsey breed there. So it just goes to show you, how this herd was looked up to and how the McCormicks were really, really proud of their farm and this Guernsey breeds that they were breeding and selling off to neighboring farmers on there. So now I'm going to turn to the 1930s and 40s, shift gears here a little bit. We're going to look at some of the 1930 anti-New Deal activist activities of Chauncey McCormick. There's little doubt in my mind that Chauncey was a true Republican progressive in the tradition of Woodrow Wilson, perhaps more so than his cousin Robert R. McCormick. Chauncey allied himself closely with the Herbert Hoover wing of the Republican Party, particularly in the 1930s and 40s. They both considered Roosevelt and his administration of New Dealers to be out to destroy American democracy and capitalism. And Roosevelt was referred to because he was the same blue blood families there at the upper Hudson River Valley. He was called a traitor to his class. So there you have it there. With the verbal and written encouragement of Herbert Hoover and also some of the press assistance of Colonel McCormick, Chauncey became one of the most sought after, believe it or not, speakers of anti-New Dealers. McCormick's speeches were reprinted in full or reported or profiled in the Chicago Tribune. By that time, the Tribune was really the voice of Midwestern conservative America firsters as well, and isolationists when we get into World War II in particular. This helped raise Chauncey McCormick's profile on the Republican Midwestern political speaking tour. McCormick's inaugural political speech titled Save America, Americanism versus New Deal, delivered at Henry's Restaurant in Chicago, was covered in detail by the Chicago Tribune. In the speech, he outlined why the American people needed to stand up against the Roosevelt administration. Through one excerpt of Roosevelt's speeches, we could just gain a sense of the political rhetoric of the time and his fervent determination. So Chauncey is speaking before this group at the famous Henry's Restaurant. He says, "Save America from the whole New Deal repudiation. They have repudiated even more than their platform and their promises. They have repudiated every principle bequeathed to us by Washington, Jefferson, Patrick Adams, Madison, Hamilton, and Monroe. They have repudiated the tested American system for an alien system of confiscating people's savings and nationwide enslavement. They repudiated Washington for Lenin, Jefferson for Stalin, Hamilton for Marx. Make no mistake about it, folks. The issue is save America. Nothing else matters now." So you kind of get a sense of the fervor of the times, particularly of a lot of the business people that were really anti-New Deal. FDR was diggling too much in their affairs at the time. Throughout correspondence available from Hoover's presidential library, one could gain a sense of the McCormick-Hoover relationships and their views on politics from the 1930s all the way to the 1940s. Hoover often would be a frequent guest of visitors at McCormick in Chicago at his Lakeview apartment. But I soon discover through telegrams and correspondence that he actually visited St. James Farm 3 times. He had dinner at St. James Farm. So you can imagine the conversation Chauncey had by hauling Colonel McCormick to the dinner table at St. James Farm at the mansion on St. James Farm. So that's kind of interesting anecdotes when you dig through papers. So I'm going to now turn to look at his impact on the Art Institute of Chicago. McCormick first became, and there's the headline there from the Tribune, his Save America speech. So the Colonel really covered him and covered all of his speeches as well. McCormick first became a trustee of the Art Institute of Chicago in 1925. The hallmark of Chauncey McCormick's relationship with the Institute was his term on the Board of Trustees at the Art Institute. His wife and his father-in-law, Charles Deering, shared his passion for art. Deering and his brother, James Deering, were both considered pioneering art collectors in America for their day and era. A great deal of the art donated by the McCormicks was in the form of bequests by them to the Art Institute of Chicago, primarily between Marion Deering McCormick and her twin sister, Mrs. Richard Eli Donaldson. McCormick and other trustees would work with director Daniel Cotton Rich during the 1930s and well into the 50s to reinvigorate the Art Institute of Chicago and make it what it is today, one of the premier art museums in the world, and one of the most visited, I'm told, next to the Louvre. McCormick contributed not only his monetary wealth, but a great deal of his personal, political, and social connections were also put into play to bring groundbreaking exhibitions to the Institute and museum patrons. He was vice president under Potter Palmer of the board of directors of the Art Institute of Chicago at that time. And among the exhibits of note was the 1933 Century of Progress Art Exhibition. He was trustee chairman of the 1933-34 Century of Progress World's Fair Exposition from 1929 to 1934, held on Chicago's lakefront and at the Art Institute of Chicago as well. He was really, a lot of times though, more tolerant of radicalism in art, however, than he was in politics. This especially became true when you read more about his life during the 1940s and 50s, as a lot of the communist red hunt began, and people were really on the Art Institute's back for showing this risque modernist art at the precious Art Institute of Chicago. And some of those works, some people consider were too modern or radical in the eyes of many critics. So the Art Institute exhibition in the 1933 World's Fair is noted as one of the most magnificent ever mounted in this country before or since for that time. At the time of the formulation of the exhibit, it was proposed to host and feature the 10 most beloved pictures in America. McCormick realized that quote, that the city of Chicago would be ridiculed in the press if such an exhibit should not take place. McCormick pushed with museum director Harsh to display over 1,000 works of art illustrating the history of Western art from the 13th century up to the American avant-garde. The exhibit attracted over 1.5 million people and resulted in the rearranging, now get this, of the exhibits in the museum by eras of art or time periods rather than the donor or art collector. In September 1943, McCormick became the president of the board of directors of the Art Institute of Chicago. He succeeded to the office of the president upon the unanimous vote following the death and the passing of Paul Palmer. He would serve until his death in 1954. In the spring, though, in 1946, Director Rich and McCormick traveled to Europe to meet with officials of the British consulate to negotiate the loan of paintings from Britain for her exposition, the masterpieces of French painting, William Hogarth, John Constable, and J.M.W. Turner. According to Rich, in an article he wrote as a tribute to McCormick, he said, McCormick planned this campaign with great adroitness, enlisting the aid of Mrs. Winston Churchill, Anthony Eden, the American ambassador, and a host of friends, both English and American. Endlessly, McCormick, Rich says in his article, visited offices in Whitehall. He spent hours with museum directors and board members. He accomplished this with grace and humor and ended by charming off the walls of Trafalgar Square Constable's painting called Hey Wayne and Hogarth's Shrimp Girl. These are two well-known paintings. The reason why this exhibition was unusual and groundbreaking was that many of these works had never left the walls of British museums. They were considered the greatest treasures of British art at the time. And considering that this was all taking place and negotiations were taking place in post-World War II England, where there were a lot more other concerns on the concerns of the British government at the time to get their economy back up and running at the time too. So that's why this is an unusual, groundbreaking exhibition. So in December and October 1946. Now, by the beginning of 1950s, however, the Art Institute was in need of funding to continue its work. At that time, its collection of art was worth over $150 million. At that time, it needed the renovation of the older building to modernize and provide additional administrative space for staff and curators. With McCormick as the lead fundraiser, the Institute embarked, as this headline says, a $1.6 million in 1952 fundraising campaign, the first in its history. There was also many collectors who had bequeathed their collections to the museum via wills and trusts. The need to plan for the housing of these collections was becoming apparent. So you have all these older blue bloods donating their artwork, giving them money to the Art Institute. Where the heck are you going to hang it? You don't have enough gallery space, folks. And you got more curators you got to hire to help plan for this. So the need to plan to housing of the collection was becoming very apparent to the board of directors. The campaign, however, resulted in the raising of over $1.6 million. Museum director Rich commented in his article as a tribute to Chauncey following his death, during the emergency campaign, I witnessed again and again Mr. McCormick telling the story of our needs to prospective contributors in the office of corporate chairman, in the homes of potential donors, and before all kinds of groups and meetings. He outlined his belief in this institution so warmly and vividly that we usually came away with a monetary pledge. Quite a salesman. He believed in the mission of the Art Institute. Without his captaincy of the campaign, Rich writes, we would never have gone over our goal by some $100,000. When a visitor enters the Art Institute today off of Michigan Avenue, McCormick's name appears not only in the roll of benefactors, but I also believe his name appears over the entryway of one of the galleries dedicated in his name. During his tenure, McCormick worked with other trustees and the museum staff to make the Chicago Art Institute world-renowned. He donated and enriched the museum with several works of art that we can go see and appreciate now. One is Martorelli's St. George Killing the Dragon, which was done in 1438, and El Greco's St. Martin and the Beggar. which was created roughly between 1599 and 1604. So when you're down at the Art Institute, appreciate that artwork even more and know the man behind the story and his wife who donated it. So McCormick left a legacy of his time, his talent and money, and bequests of work of art during his 30-year tenure on the board of directors of the Art Institute of Chicago. Well, the end of his life finally came on the 8th of September, 1954. Marian Deering, Chauncey's wife, writing to Helen Keller, the famous educator and activist for the blind, said, quote, "Chauncey has been unusually well over the summer and was ill only a day and a half. The crushing blow has left me shell-shocked and only partly alive." The Chicago Tribune's front page, which was Colonel McCormick's paper, again, putting his cousin front and center on the front page of the Tribune there, carried a front and center obituary on the passing of his cousin, Chauncey McCormick. McCormick had died of a ruptured aorta of the heart at the Mount Desert Island Hospital in Bar Harbor, Maine, not far from his beloved summer home, East Point in Seal Harbor. He left an estate valued at $2.9 million, which in today's money, 2021, if this is correct, that's over $20,339,000 some dollars. Prior to being laid to rest at Chicago's historic Graceland Cemetery, an eloquent eulogy for McCormick was delivered on the 11th of September, 1954, in the small white chapel at the First Presbyterian Church in Wheaton, Illinois, by the Reverend Robert Bowman Stewart. In the eulogy, Reverend Stewart compares the life of Chauncey McCormick, now get this, to the life of Sir Christopher Wren, the famed 17th century architect of the city of London. So he says in this eulogy, quote, after Sir Wren's passing, the grateful people of England had carved on the walls of St. Paul's over the inner door, north door, the simple statement in Latin, si momentum requires circumspice. I think I'm doing the Latin right, kind of rusty on that. If you would see my memorial, look about you. The one we remember today, Chauncey McCormick, was a great architect of those intangibles of life, without which existence is devoid of vitality and beauty. If you see his memorial, look about you. You would have to go far beyond the seas and look into the faces of a grateful people of Poland after World War I. You would need to scan the countenances of numberless young people in our state and others who have been unfortunate in not having parents. That's alluding to Chauncey and Marian's work with the Children's Home and Aid Society, which they've given a lot of time and money to that to find foster parents for children. So that's what he's alluding to on that. You would have to look long into the countless faces of unknown people who have stood before great works of art and absorbed vitality and beauty. You have to look deep into the hearts of those who knew his genius for friendship. Patrician is in his instincts, democratic, small d, in his outreach, a very great soul. If you would see his memorial, look about you. So that ends my talk here. I thought that was appropriate to end with the eulogy. Now, the picture I'm ending on here was a Christmas card. That was when a Christmas card my grandfather got from Chauncey. The young lady on his lap is his first, and I believe Brooks McCormick's oldest child, Martha McCormick. Martha later married Bill Hunt. Bill Hunt became very close to Brooks McCormick at the end. And Martha, I am told, I don't know if this is true or not, she spent a lot of her last days before she passed away, died of cancer, even before Brooks McCormick passed away, on St. James Farm. So I'm going to leave you with that note, very elegant little picture, touching picture of him holding his granddaughter with a little smile. You can barely see it on his face. So, and I'm welcome to entertain, any questions or so that we might have. So.
Thank you, Kevin. Would you be so kind as to end the recording at this time?
Yeah. Let me see. Let me do that. Yeah. Okay. Stop the recording.